Rahul, welcome to Validated.
Good to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you on. You are the head of trading at Ellipsis Labs, which has been doing a lot of cool stuff in Solana and around Solana for a number of years at this point. I wanted to talk with you as part of this wider conversation on market structure, market making, MCP, Constellation, all of these changes and problems on Solana, as well as sort of a little bit broader of perspective of how this works in other ecosystems, what's working well, what's working poorly, how it compares to traditional financial markets. But for a starter, give us a little bit of your background, how you got into this space and what your current role kind of entails.
Yeah. So I got started in trading just right out of college. I started at one of those traditional option market making firms in Chicago. Started on just trading commodities, like really random ones, like cocoa, soybeans, cotton, things like that. And then eventually the firm I was at started a crypto desk. So I started a crypto options desk, which I started trading a lot of Deribit options for 2 to 3 years. And we were probably the biggest player in crypto options from 2020 to 2022. Eventually just got a little tired of trading in general. So I left, took a 9-month break, ended up here at Ellipsis Labs, which is the plan was not to trade. But we started a exchange, and then it turns out the exchange needs liquidity, and we are pretty good at trading. So we decided, this is the first version of Phoenix, it's a spot exchange.
Yep.
So we provided a little bit of liquidity there, and then realized there's just a lot of opportunity on Solana to take really professional trading concepts and apply them to a pretty nascent market. So we building out a little bit of a trading business on the side at Ellipsis Labs, where we provide liquidity on spot assets. So we started with Phoenix, and then we moved on to these prop AMMs. And then nowadays we're trying to do perps as well.
So I want to go back to kind of your start into crypto, where you're at a proper traditional fund that's decided, hey, there's something that's worth looking at in crypto. What was the thing that made them say, hey, this desk is worth spinning up? And then of course the thing that made them say, hey, this desk is worth keeping up, because trading firms experiment all the time. They kill things all the time. But what made this persist?
Yeah. So obviously when you're a trading firm, the thing you want is where can I find my edge, right?
Yes.
What can I do better than everybody else in some weird way? So the way the firm I was called Acuna Capital. I think one of the reasons we thought we had an edge there is we were just willing to take a more regulation risk than everybody else. A bigger firm like Citadel or Jump or whoever at the time, maybe it was okay, if I go into crypto, there's going to be regulators, there's going to be a lot of accounting risk. But Acuna is a small firm, 500 people. So we're okay, if we go into this, at least we have a little more flexibility in actually just being able to do it. And then the other point is you take these high upside bets and you're just okay, if it works out, it's just you're the first to the market. In options, right. We were actually probably the first to market. We were trading on these really, really shitty systems and just manually doing a lot of trading. And we were first to market, and it just happened to blow up in 2020. That was when Bitcoin went from 12K to 30K in the span of months. And then we were the spreads are so wide, there's just so much edge going through the market, and you're just one of the first to actually be there. And in general, I think the trading philosophy I like a lot is you're way better off being 80% as good as everybody else, but first, than being 99 percentile something and 8th, right? We see this in every trade. Even
yes.
Prop AMMs, we see you're the 9th prop AMM to launch, and you're just not going to make as much money because the edge has been beaten down and you're competing with 9 players.
Yeah. So when you started looking at on-chain trading, how is that different from the markets you'd been interacting with previously?
Yeah. This is why I love Solana, because it's just completely different in so many ways that are so interesting. I think the main thing that's different that you notice throughout the years is just the game changes all the time. TradFi markets they have very strict regulations, they have very strict rules, and then it would take years and years of lobbying to change any of the rules or understand
right.
Okay, if even me moving a data center across the world is so tedious. Whereas in on-chain markets, the market structure changes all the time. Okay, how do you land a transaction changes all the time. You're good for a few months, and then all of a sudden someone's better than you because there's a change that you didn't know about. The Jito changed something, validators changed something, schedulers changed something. So there's this whole piece of transaction lending that doesn't really exist in TradFi. It kind of exists because you want to be fast, but it doesn't really exist in terms of you need to understand where the validator is, how to land your transaction. And then the second thing that's very different that changes all the time is literally the structure of the market. We saw with where do you actually trade? You can put your liquidity on AMM and get flow that way. You can put your liquidity in an order book and maybe trade that way. You could try starting up your own version of trading, which is starting a prop AMM. So there's just like different ways to attack the trade, and it's all like very malleable. Like you can just do whatever, you can really just do whatever you want, in some way.
Yeah.
As long as you can convince people to send you a trade. So there's just like a huge surface area of like trades you can put on.
Do you think this makes a better market than traditional finance, or just a different market?
Yeah. So that's a great question, because it really just depends on who you are, right? Like if you're if you're a perp trader and you want to make money, I would argue it's like, okay, it's a better market because there's just like so many games you can play and you can try to just be good at this like niche game, right? But if you're someone like nowadays, I think we were like, okay, we're trying to move all of finance to on-chain, right? So if you're a big believer in that, which I think we should all be, it becomes very tedious to like play these games that are constantly changing, constantly like there's like weird dark forest things going on. You're like, how are you going to convince like a big institution to be like, yes, let's come play this game with everybody else? Like, like get our shovels out, like fight each other in the trenches over this stuff when there's like there's no good rules. So the rules kind of are arbitrary. They don't really make sense. It's tough to convince people about billions of dollars capital in that kind of game.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I've heard arguments both ways that what crypto really needs is it needs many more of the structures that resemble traditional finance. And I've kind of heard the inverse that like, most of those structures just are sort of incumbent beneficiaries. And if you actually have a decent amount of shakeup periodically, whether it's good or bad, it just creates opportunities for new market entrants into the space. Do you think there's some truth to that?
I think there's truth in that in terms of like, yes, you do create opportunity for new market entrants. You create opportunity for smaller shops to get involved. Like, it's very feasible for a 3-person crypto team to be a very competitive trading firm in crypto. But again, like that is a different end goal than like saying, I want so much trust in the system that like people will just interact with it without even thinking about it. I think if you want that world, you want like everyone to trust it, I think you should not be optimizing for like how can I let new entrants in and make sure they're just as competitive? I think it's okay to have like a system that is not as easy to break into, but because it's not easy, that there's like good rules and good, like they're just a better system that people can interact with. It's more trusted, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess I would say that like I've had trades reversed that I've made on traditional financial systems. Yep. This happens, I wouldn't say all the time, but like you'll see a bad Oracle price on Robinhood or something. This used to happen much more often in like 21 and 22, but you see a bad Oracle price, you'd buy Apple at an 80% discount, and then you get a sad email a few hours later of like, hey, sorry, we're not actually doing that. And so it's kind of interesting to hear you talk about like trust in a system as being, because in some ways like crypto is both more and less trustworthy. It's more trustworthy in the sense of when something is settled, that short of like an Ethereum level hard fork intervention, it is settled, and you don't necessarily have that assurance in traditional finance, at least from a retail perspective. So I guess like maybe there's a difference between, obviously hacks are a different component, right? And hacks go with sort of settlement security in some regard. But I guess how do you think about that from the perspective of like a retail user? Should they care about the underlying market structure, or would they just care about the outcome?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the retail traders only care about the outcome, right? But I think there's trade-offs in everything. Like, you say like, okay, you
everything's trade-offs.
Yeah, of course. And you can't reverse a trade, right? Like that's great. It feels really good when you bought Apple at 80% discount, you can't reverse it. Feels really bad when you get hacked and you can't reverse it, right? Like
yes.
So of course. But of course, if going back to the retail trader, like they only care about the outcomes. But I would argue that's almost the problem with crypto sometimes, that the outcome is not obvious. Like sure, like you've got a trade, you got the price, it's settled. But you're even thinking about like what are prop AMMs? Like you're like, okay, I'm sending my trade into like this like black box system that is run by like effectively a trading shop, which you could think of like as an MBV shop, and you're just like hoping that they give you like a good fill, right? You're just like, okay, these are the parameters of my transaction. I'm allowing 10% slippage or whatever, and I send it to this black box system. I can't read the code of it. I don't know how their strategy works. I don't know anything about it, but I'm hoping to give me a good outcome. And that's like, I would say that's fine for like if we want to become a meme coin trading chain or keep doing that. There's I think most users who interact with crypto today are okay with that, but I would not expect to onboard a billion users who are okay with that. That's where I think it breaks down. You can definitely find your niche if people are okay with that.
Yeah. So you mentioned like Solana's very interesting to trade on. Phoenix obviously has had a few different iterations of it over the years. I think it started in 21 or maybe 20. So 22. Yeah. So I've been around in Solana DeFi for a very long time. There's been multiple iterations of that. High level, like, how is Solana? I mean, the answer here is a huge amount, but like, walk us through kind of the eras of on-chain trading and how this has changed over time and where we're at today.
Yeah. So we started the Phoenix Club, the order book, in like, I want to say late 2022. At the time, there was literally one market maker on Solana. His name was Space Monkey. He's one of the OGs. And so we got him on board and we're like, okay, like, now what, right? And like, there's the chain has like a total, across the whole chain, across every protocol, there's like $10 million of volume going through the whole chain, across every token. And like, there's one market maker. Like, what do we do? So then we spin up our own trading shop, or like we start market making as well. Still like very little volume. And then like, I think it all really changed when Bonk went off. Like, Bonk just like produced like a ton of volume. And then that's when we, like, at the time we were sending transactions with like no prio fee, through one RPC, like everything landed all the time. Like, you don't even think about like how to land a transaction because it doesn't matter. And then eventually, like, it was like, okay, like, we try and trade Bonk, and like all of a sudden realizing, well, we're not getting the best fill. It's like, okay, well, maybe we should actually integrate Jito. Like, we didn't even try doing that before, right?
Right.
So then you're like, okay, let's try adding Jito. Let's try like actually adding a prio fee. No one knows if prio fees even do anything at the time. Like, it just like an arbitrary number, and then the scheduler might not respect it. But then, like, obviously things have changed. Like, the network itself has gotten a lot more reliable. There's a little bit more determinism in, like, if you send a certain tip or a fee, you're probably probabilistically changing your outcome. It's not like deterministically, but probabilistically. And then fun is like, it's just gotten so much more competitive in the trading world. Like, there's the level of sophistication that these trading strategies have, both from like the toxic takers, the R bots, and the market makers, is like, 100x what it was when we started. It's just like very, very impressive.
Yeah.
I would say especially the R bots are very, very clever these days. And then, obviously, like, we've had like some of the best trading firms in the world now trading on Solana, which is like really cool to see.
Interesting. So like, when you sort of look at this landscape, like, high level, how has the engineering had to change?
From a trading perspective?
Yeah, like you're I mean, obviously, like, there's details you can't get into here, but like, from a technical setup perspective, like, when you guys started, stake weighted QoS, I think, wasn't really a thing, or it was just coming on the market. There's been a ton of optimizations, obviously, that Firedancer and Anza teams have done. Like, how often are you guys like having to reinvent your infrastructure to remain competitive?
Yeah, I think this is a big theme of 2025 specifically. Is like the game really was just like, can you land your transaction better than everybody else for a long time? And that required like a lot of in-depth analysis of like what is going on chain. Like you have to, your dashboards have to be really good. Your like analytics have to be really good, because you have to be like, okay, like, this guy landed ahead of me. Like, what is he doing different than me? And like, how is he actually doing that? So you have to have really good data, and just also being able to see everyone else's like markouts and P&L and all that kind of stuff is important. So like, the data parsing game got pretty intensive, especially parsing like this like really hard to parse Solana's data, especially when like a lot of prop AMMs specifically don't want you to be able to parse their data, so they do a little bit, some tricks. And then the other side, as you mentioned, is like, just like the actual like understanding deep into the validator. How does the validator work? Like, are there any tricks you can do to like make sure the validator prioritizes your transaction over somebody else's? They're not obvious. Like, obviously you can pay more fee, like whatever, but can you do something more clever than that? Can you like, whether spam harder or send to more RPCs, or like find a real trick inside the validator, set up your own validator? So it's just like it's like one of those games where like you don't even know what you're looking for. You're just like looking for something, and when you find it, you're like very excited. And then someone might patch it, someone might change it, someone might do it better than you, and then you start over. But that's like kind of all trades, I guess.
Yeah, but I think kind of what you're saying is you have to do this more often in crypto market making than in traditional trading in traditional venues.
I think so. I think it's just like the surface area for what can change underneath you is much wider, whereas in traditional finance, it really just feels like you're just cutting latency over and over again. And so that's like the one thing you're trying to do. Whereas here, like, there's many areas where you can attack transaction landing, or because it's not just latency. It can be like an actual prio fee change or whatever else.
So from like a market making perspective, like, what has changed so much about a prop AMM versus a club?
So when we came out of SolFi, it was like, I guess it's technically the second prop AMM. Affinity was the first, but it's been around for a long time. And I think we probably optimized a lot of like what the modern prop AMM does. And I think the way I reasoned about it at the time was effectively like you think about market making is like this very defensive game, right? You're like, trying to pick up these like pennies like over and over again, like thousands of times a day. You're like, okay, like I can make a few pennies, and then it's really bad if someone like steamrolls me and I lose a bunch of money, like once in a while. And what's happening on these clubs is like, as a market maker, you're like trying to like play defense, but you don't have that many tools. Because like at the end of the day, like your life is in the validator's hands. He can just like decide like, hey, actually I'm gonna let Wintermute or whoever else like trade ahead of you, and you can't cancel, right?
Yeah.
And the protocol, the design of the application, like on top of Solana, which is a club, gave you no tools. It was just like you're equal participant as everybody else. So what the prop AMM does is give like the market maker a little bit more, like just another tool. Which the tool effectively is like, it's like your like cost to update your transaction or your prices is a lot cheaper all of a sudden. Instead of being like 100,000 CUs, it's now like 500 CUs or 50 CUs if you're really good. And the other thing it does is it gives you a little bit of more control over what happens when the trade comes through. So instead of just saying like, okay, your quotes are on the order book and the trade happens at this price because your quotes are there, it gives you effectively this version of last look where you can like inspect the transaction and decide like, okay, I actually think this transaction is like 99.99% likely to be Wintermute. I'm actually decided like, I don't want to give him the same price I thought I was going to give him at first, because why would I do that? And then, so this has like two benefits. It saves you money, obviously, as a market maker. And then it allows you to charge real retail like less money because you're saving most money from not getting picked off by a trading firm. So it's like effectively you're cutting out this like middleman. This middleman is these like toxic takers who are just like extracting value from the system. And the less you can let them take from the system, the better everyone else in the system, everyone else in the system is happier.
I want to get into kind of some of the current conversations and debates and some of the things that we hear on Twitter and we hear in Telegram groups, but it's kind of hard to verify without talking to people who are actually on-chain market making and on-chain trading today, which is like, how would you describe the current state of market structure and market making and trading on Solana? Like, how good is it? How bad is it? What are the parts that you like about it? Where are areas that you would consider problems?
Yeah. So I think discussion almost has to be like spot versus perps. So we can start with like spot, because I think there are like nuances there that like make it different.
Because spot's very tight on chain today.
Yeah. So I would say we've almost hit this like political point in spot market making in some way, right? Like we're like no one's really making that much money if you look at it, like in terms of market makers. But like everyone's running one because like, hey, like it's actually really good for the narrative. Like it's actually really sick that we can like say like Solana is like the best place to trade spot, which it really is.
I think we often forget that in economics, a perfectly efficient market is one where no one makes any money.
Yeah, like it's like actually like there theoretically are market makers on Solana today who are maybe okay running at like a small profit, maybe even a small loss, because it's actually really good for the Solana bags. Like it's like so that's I think where we're at, where we're like market making has gotten. Yeah, alignment has actually gotten to the market makers, I think, at this point. So I think it's like I would say it's almost at like a equilibrium where like people are making a little bit of money, not a lot, and like the game hasn't really evolved probably in all of 2026 that much.
How would you? There's been a lot of conversation and debate around a few topics, and they get sort of expressed in this idea of MCP. But if you kind of break it down, there's maybe 3 or 4 major components of MCP that are like the things people talk about. One is around transaction ordering being something that a validator doesn't have control over anymore. The second is around selective censorship resistance, and the idea that, obviously the whole a validator can still fail the whole block, but they don't really have this ability to pick and choose what transactions get in or what transactions get excluded. And these things are often talked about as like blockers for making something like perps work better on chain. But you guys are building a perps DEX today. It's live and functioning in beta. Like, how much do these components today impact the ability to do this profitably? And how do you view some of these proposed changes? Are they helpful? Are they harmful? Are they monumental? Are they kind of nice to haves? How would you characterize these?
I'm personally a big fan of MCP. I think when I think about these things, it's like there's like a where we are today, and then there's like a where do you think the world will end up a year or 2 years, 3 years from now. There's a lot of path dependency there, but you have to like when you're thinking about big changes to the protocol, you have to actually think about like what happens 3 years. What happens when we reach like the end state of the game, right? Like what happens when we reach the equilibrium? And when you think about the equilibrium, like I know there's a lot of people out there being like, oh, like people aren't actually censoring market makers today. Like, oh, look, where's the data? Like whatever. But like, obviously like there's economic incentive to do that. And like at the end state, someone will do that, right? So if you're building a perps exchange, you're building a market maker with leverage on a perps deck. So you're like, oh, well, what happens in like you're trying to pick up these pennies, and then what happens when like the turkey thing happens, where like you lose all your money. And like in the case where that happens, tomorrow like quantum computing comes out and Bitcoin falls 80%, right? Like it's like, okay, well, all of a sudden, suppose a trading firm, a competitive trading firm is building the next block in the current single leader world. They're obviously very incentivized to like for one block actually censor me and not let me sell my Bitcoin, and all of a sudden I can on leverage lose all my money.
Right.
And that is just like bound to happen one day. We can pretend that like it's not happening today, so it'll never happen, but I think that's like not really a good argument.
Sure.
And then when I think about building a perps, I think it's very scary. Like you're doing things on leverage, you have to reliably land your transactions, especially as an exchange to liquidate people, land Oracle updates to like ensure your exchange is in good health, and then also as a market maker to cancel your orders. And I think when I think about MCP, it's like the one solution that I have personally heard. Maybe there's others. I'm sure there's others, but there's the one viable one that I've heard that allows you to have this idea of like application control execution in a reliable way, in a very fair way. It allows you to actually be able to say like, okay, I'm like all of a sudden probably 100x more confident I'm not going to get censored. And then it takes away this like very scary vector of attack that like it just exists on every single block currently. And I think that is like actually the most important thing we need to solve as Solana. And I just think that, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so is it fair to say that your view on it is it's more of like good hygiene, like it's preventative work that needs to be done, but it in itself does not, like there's been this huge debate for a while about why there's no good perps decks on Solana, right? And Phoenix might be changing that, but like the consensus today is like there is not a competitive perps deck that's like publicly available that rivals something like a Hyperliquid. And there's been a lot of talk about, well, a lot of this is due to the fact that we don't have a lot of these tools and functions in MCP. Do you think that, like, from your perspective, MCP actually like makes Solana a better place to, like, a meaningfully better place to have perps exist? Or like, do you think about these as like, we need missile warning systems, not because we're going to get hit with missiles, but because if we don't, like, we just need them because we need to make sure we don't get hit by a missile someday.
Yeah, I think those are almost the same thing in some ways. So like if you think about like who wants to build perps, right? Like people who want to build perps are obviously very talented, they're very aware of the risk that comes with it, right? So you're like, okay, like if I'm gonna build perps, like 2 years ago, it's not like we never considered building perps. Like we built exchanges, we built Spot, we looked at it, we're like, how would we build perps if we can't guarantee like our oracles will land, our liquidations will land? And even the reason I think we were convinced that like, hey, like this is actually viable is we heard about things like MCP, we heard about things like, hey, like maybe this is actually going to be viable one day on Solana, and like we're all building to that future, and it'll all like the stars will align in a year or two, and then it'll actually all be feasible. In the meantime, like we can ride the path dependency, like okay, we can hope that validators are not, incentivized enough to like actually fuck us over, whatever. But in the end state, we're hoping like, hey, like we want to be around for a long time, we've been around for decades, right? We're hoping like by then, like by the end of 2030 or whatever, like there will actually be a system that makes sense on Solana that will perps on. But in the meantime, we can still use what we have and hope it doesn't like end terribly, So but it's like,
is it sort of like the fact that this is now proposed and coming, like gave you the confidence to say, hey, we can eat some risk in the interim, but in the absence of this, it wasn't worth the team's time to try and build a perps product? I
think that's directionally correct. I think it's like a big factor, but I wouldn't say it's like the only factor.
Of course.
I think Solana has like a lot of other benefits, a lot of big user base, big things like that. But
of course,
it's definitely nice to know as like, us traders are very, very aware. Like we're very aware of like the left tail, the worst outcome.
Yes.
And like in the current state of Solana, that's like a huge worry. It's like, okay, like I can't really build something if I think like one day I might wake up and all the money's gone. So it's always like, what are we doing to prevent that? And like, I think the MCP is the one solution I've heard that prevents that and lets us sleep at night,
Yeah. So setting aside like the implementation details for a minute, are there things you would like to see Solana capable of doing that it's not capable of doing today that would improve the spot or perps trading experience?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, the big thing is like you want some version of ACE. I think it's just like a purely additive thing, like
right, which is application controlled execution, which is the idea that an application has some amount of control over the order in which transactions interacting with it within a block get processed.
Correct. Yeah. So that gives it, it gives both the protocol a lot of like comfort, because you can be like, okay, before anything happens, before like we let people withdraw their money, we can actually make sure that there's a valid Oracle update that happened in this block, because we allow that to land first, and then we can be very, very safe and be like, okay, look, we know that this price is valid. You're allowed to withdraw your money. We did not get like attacked by like some, like someone tried to attack Farcoin yesterday on Hyperliquid. It's not like, we know that's not going on. So I think like the challenge with perps on Solana is often like you're competing against these people who have full control of like the execution layer and the sequencing layer and the application layer. And then now as a builder on Solana, you only have complete like influence over one of them, and you're trying to compete against people who have way more control than you. That just creates a lot of surface area if there were things that go wrong.
Yeah. Interesting. What do you, from like a trading perspective, you guys must think about regulation a bunch. We've seen that tokenized equities have become much more of a talking point. It seems to me, and like Austin Campbell had a good thread this day about the securitized episode on Bankless, basically saying that like there's a whole bunch of regulatory challenges before these things can ever actually trade. I'm curious kind of, when you think about risk of assets, right? There's a whole bunch of obviously smart contract risk that exists. We've talked a bit about like selective censorship risk. Do you view RWAs of any type of sort as a different type of risk structure when you're trading relative to like digital native assets like Bitcoin or Sol or Bonk?
Yeah, this is a good question, because it's actually like a lot. It's like, what is your philosophy on perps, right?
Yes.
Like, what is a perp? And I don't really think there's much of a difference, because I think it's like, as long as you're super, super clear on how you define what your Oracle source is and like how your Oracle changes, like all you're doing in any perp, when you boil it down to, is you're just saying there's some Oracle that exists in the world, and I'm going to trade on what that Oracle number is, right? And like some oracles are very confident. And you're like, okay, I know Coinbase is trading Bitcoin 80K, so I'm just going to say that's the price. And everyone kind of canonically agrees that's kind of true. You could also have an oracle that just like, whatever Rahul says today, whatever number he says, that's the new oracle. And like that's also a valid thing that people could trade on perps. It's just obviously very manipulatable. And there's a whole scale of things in between that have different degrees of like trade-off, and like how manipulatable it is, and like how liquid it is, or whatever else. And I think they're all valid things to trade. And as long as you can very clearly define what your rules are in exchange, I think it's just like, okay. Like it doesn't the nice thing about perps, it doesn't actually have to know if material things have transfer hands. It doesn't have to exist. You're just trading a number. And like, you just have to be very clear.
Functionally synthetic products.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Does that feel more or less risky for you than like tokenized Tesla?
The perp on Tesla versus tokenized Tesla, you're saying?
Yeah. Not from like a which should I trade perspective, obviously, but from the perspective of as someone evaluating risk, do you view those as the same, different? Because I think one of the things that's interesting about perps is like the perps DEX can of course get hacked, but like the perp doesn't exist as a thing. Like an infinite mint bug in an on-chain contract for tokenized Tesla is sort of a broader risk perspective than like the perp of Tesla on Phoenix or Hyperliquid.
I think the perp is a lot simpler to reason about, because there's only like one thing that can go wrong, which is like the DEX itself. Like you have to basically trust the DEX, right? Like you'd be like, okay, they're gonna publish like a reasonable Oracle price. They're not gonna like fuck me on that. They're not gonna just like decide like actually the Oracle price is all of a sudden 10% different than the real price of Tesla. So you have to be very confident that whoever is publishing the Oracle price is publishing a fair Oracle price, and you trust that. And then you have to trust like the safety of your money on the platform.
Right.
And then like there's no other really attack other than that. And then anything that has like a real token behind it, or is claims to have like, okay, we have like something in escrow that matches the Tesla tokens that are on chain. There's like I guess you have to trust them too, right? It's a matter of like what entity you trust. And I don't think there's like a reason I would say like one entity is less trustworthy than the other. I just think anyone trading anything should be very aware of like the counterparty risk, or like, the risk they're taking on who's backing this asset,
Yeah. What do you think is behind the rise of perps as a retail-focused product?
Yeah. Actually, they've been around for a long time, and they've always been pretty exciting. I think it's just the access to them has probably gotten easier as time has gone on. Like I've been trading some form of perp since like 2019, and there's always been like really
I wouldn't
fun
call
reason
you
about-
exactly an average DeFi user, though.
Fair. But yeah, I think
Like it went from everyone trading spot and being very excited about on-chain spot, and like you can just see the volume moved to perps. And is it just like high quality access products like Hyperliquid came up, or was there something else that made a technology change?
Yeah, the reason Hyperliquid is nice is that there's no KYC, just like on-chain trading. Before there was, you want to trade perps, you got to go to Binance account, which like a lot of people in the US just can't do. But I think the main thing that actually changed is like there's like a hot ball of money thing that happens, right? There's just like, where is all the attention? Where is like the money like really, like where's the attention? So the more attention it has, the more volatility something has. And right now the hot ball of money is literally just on gold and oil. It's just like where everyone wants to talk about it. The news affects it very directly. There's like 10%, 20% moves in it. It's just the most exciting thing to trade right now. And that will not always be true. I think something else could be the next big thing. And whether that is something that exists on a perp or it goes back to like a spot asset or not, it's not clear. If I knew that, I would be somewhere else. But like it just like it's just the attention focused economy. You just got to be able to chase and trade the next big thing. And right now, this happens just to be commodities.
Interesting. And do you think that if tokenized commodities, like if there were spot versions of these, that we would see similar volume excitement, or is the perp the new sexy thing, and like spot has become the bond market?
Yeah, it's tough because like the problem with spot on anything like that is like it doesn't really make sense. Like, what are you going to do? Like redeem your token for what? Like how are you going to keep the price in line? Like there's no like mechanism that really makes sense. Whereas like the mechanism for perps is like super simple, which is like we're just going to track this number and then we're going to charge you. If the number is far away from what we think the number should be, we're going to charge you for being on the wrong side, right? Which is like it just like works really seamlessly. Whereas perps, like you need this like spot, you need this chicken and egg problem where you need like a bunch of liquidity. But then in order to have that liquidity, you know what you're trading, and then like, if you're a market maker on oil, tokenized oil, and you get long tokenized oil on chain, what are you going to do? Like you have to go redeem it for real oil and then close the arb yourself. Like it's just not practical. Whereas perps price themselves.
The only reason I'm wondering this is like because we have like Uranium Digital doing not perps, right, but like tokenized uranium that's in a storage facility. And then we do have like most gold that trades doesn't move, like physically move, right? It's just paper ledger accounting of, it now says Austin owns this gold, but it's not like anyone's going into the vault and moving it into my account.
Yeah. So I think it works really well once you have this like established, like you've already solved chicken and egg problem.
Right. Okay.
But I think to start a new market, it just like it's so easy to spin up like a perp oil market because you don't need to actually transfer anything anywhere.
The right people to actually do this would be like OPEC should tokenize their oil. Yeah. It's not something that like a $20 million fund could do.
Right. Because the mint redeem is very, very capital intensive, very hard, very regulatory expensive, strange regulations on it. So mint redeem for these things are very, very hard.
Do you think there's sometimes I worry that in crypto we're bypassing a lot of the traditional products and going straight to the exotic products, and that somehow increases like the systemic risk of the ecosystem? Is that a reasonable concern in your view? Do you think about that?
Can you explain more, like what kind of product do you think we bypassed?
We skipped getting commodities on chain, we skipped getting equities on chain, and we kind of just went straight to like derivative products of them.
Yeah. I think it's not a concern. It's more just like what is the easier thing to do on chain. And I think like it's inevitable that if like our systems are so good, our market structure is so good, like everyone wants to trade on chain, that will eventually get the harder things put on chain. It just like you're always any reasonable person is going to try to put the easier thing on chain first, get traction, and then like no one's going to be like, let me go for like the moonshot of putting like a tokenized version of something, which just takes like years of regulation, years of like understanding mint redeem, doing all the stuff, and it's like doing it and then realizing there's no PMF. So I think it's like it's the same thing as like why do we start with meme coins? Like it's just like the easier thing to reason about. You're like, oh, let me just throw a bunch of meme coins up there, see if people trade it, and like we'll figure out like better assets later.
Interesting. Are there existing financial products that you would be excited to see get brought onto crypto?
Yeah, I have a nerdy one that everyone else just thinks is a bad idea, but I really want to trade VIX perps.
Great.
I think it's a good one.
Give me the bull case for this.
I mean, it's effectively like people like volatility, and this is just betting on volatility. It's like saying like, okay, like I think like tomorrow the Iran war will escalate. I just want to get long. I don't know on which asset's going to go down or whatever. I just want to get long volatility in the world because it's like, and you just want one instrument that can quantify that. And I think
it's the ultimate emotional trading.
Yeah,
like I feel good about things today. I feel bad about things today. Interesting.
Yeah, let me just get long volatility. It's good. But I think this is because I used to be an options trader, so I think I might be in a bubble.
What do your colleagues say about why it's a bad idea?
Well, they said only you want to trade that because no one else even knows what VIX is, which I think is a fair criticism.
If people should tweet at Eugene if they'd like to also trade it?
Yeah, if people want to do VIX Perps, tweet at Real Eugene Chen.
Perfect.
Or is it, no, 0x Shit Trader on Twitter, I believe.
We talked a little bit about like your views on the feature set that MCP brings and kind of why it's important, as well as sort of what some of the people who maybe say it's not as urgent think. Like, what is your kind of mental model for why this is important and kind of how people should be thinking about the debate ahead of a SIMD vote?
Yeah. So there's effectively like two camps on Solana, and well, there might be a third, which is like Onza, which I'm not sure how they view the world. But there's this camp that is like very entrenched in the current Solana world, which, you know, it's very incentivized to like say like, okay, like I know what's going on in the current world. I'm probably profitable. I want to like keep iterating on this world because like there's a lot of like, well, it's called low hanging fruit to like IBRL, the validator. We can like increase censorship resistance by like lowering block times, you know, which is like not crazy. It does work. But then the second camp, which is like, okay, like I don't care about like being the best meme coin trading platform or like, you know, getting like marginally better over the course of the next 4 years. I want to actually like compete with like TradFi. And if you actually want to do that, I think you have to create like a completely different system and overhaul the system. And the main thing that MCP brings is like it gets rid of this like monopoly that the leader has. And there's just simply no trading from the world that wants to trade in a world where like trading from across the street gets to decide how things are ordered. And it's just like you got to overhaul the system from the ground up, and that's how you get like this like an upside of like maybe bringing like 100x to on-chain activity instead of like slow iteration on the current framework. I think that those are just two radically different camps, and they're both like, I understand the incentives behind both of them, and they both have like valid points, but I think it just depends which camp you fall on.
Yeah. One of the things that's been brought up a few times by some folks who are not like anti-MCP, but worried about it a bit is that the time it takes from when you send a transaction to it is in a block could be much longer because of all of the work between sending it to a proposer, which then sends it to a tester, which then eventually sends it on to the actual block builder. How much do you think that sort of transaction landing time matters for a feedback loop for a trader? Because in traditional finance, like that signal of inclusion is basically guaranteed. Like the amount of time that NYSE or NASDAQ drops a packet in your transaction flow is extremely low.
Well, I think with MCP is actually somewhat similar, where your inclusion latency is actually not that bad. But I think when you know you're actually where you are in the block and like what's the block propaganda in the world is actually is probably higher.
Yeah.
But like I think at the end of the day, if you're a market maker, you're like, I don't really care. Like you're probabilistically trading, or you're like, okay, I'm gonna spam the shit out of the network, and like I'm gonna assume everything I'm doing the best I can per block, and like I don't really need to know. Sure, you kind of need to know if you got filled because like that tells you what your current inventory is and it helps. But like this is like a very small optimization in the grand scheme of all the upsides you're getting. And then obviously for a retail trader, they on the order of like milliseconds or even a second, they definitely don't care where they are in the block. So I think like it's a pretty small trade-off in terms for all the upsides you're getting. And in general, like when I currently trade in Solana, I rarely ever care like how long it took me to understand I landed. I just care that did I land, right? That's like 99% of it, and the 1%, like, it'd be nice to know. It'd be nice to know like a little bit faster, like I got filled, like sure, but like it's not that big of a deal.
So knowing that you landed though, like don't you have to wait to observe the shreds coming out of the block? Yeah. Okay. So like I guess that's sort of one of the questions I've had from a few folks, which is like in periods of time where blocks are just full, right? And yeah, Trent will tell you blocks are never full, but blocks do get full, right? They don't get full a lot of days each year, but they're full on 10/10. They're full on like the moments where trading potentially matters the most because you have the most on the line are the moments where blocks are most likely to be full. On that additional latency, is there any concern there? I mean, my guess is what would happen is you would just send your transaction to all 16 proposers at that situation and just sort of, pretty good chance you're going to get in at that point.
Yeah. So like the main thing that matters here is like, like you want the defensive things to get included for sure. So with application control execution, at least you know like if I'm included ahead of all the other things. And second point is like, yeah, you want to know if you're included at all. And
Right.
like, yeah, and market makers, like I think that's something you can let these like really talented people figure out is like, okay, like, how do I spam out all the 16 includes the people, make sure they get in? How do I put up in protocol defenses where like, even like every prop AMM today will have like, if I haven't heard from like the main oracle that controls the prop AMM for like 2 slots, maybe you should show us tight liquidity. And like, these are all like tractable problems, right? But like you could just say, if you were included on 1010 for like 5 slots, you just say, hey, my liquidity is now like 10x wider.
Yeah.
But the thing that you really don't want is like some taker coming in and that's sweeping your whole book, and before you could even talk to it, that's like quite bad.
Got it.
And just like way more likely with one leader than 16.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for going over this today. I think folks learned a lot. I think this will probably help people get a better sense of what they can think about in terms of like a market maker's perspective on some of these new tools that are being proposed for Solana. If folks are interested in learning more about what you do and Phoenix, where can they dive in a bit more?
Yeah, for sure. You can always DM me on Twitter. My Telegram is somewhere, but we can always DM me on Twitter. You can always DM Eugene or Jerry on Twitter as well. They also would love to chat about this stuff. But yeah, I'm always happy to chat with people interested in like learning more about why or what market makers think about the system. Because I find the Twitter debates to be a little bit I just annoying. Like I think that there's a lot of data manipulation that happens, a lot of like fragmented arguments, and long form things are always going to be more insightful.
Yeah, I agree on that. My last question before I let you go: when is Phoenix going out of beta?
Yeah, great question. Unfortunately, I'm just a little liquidity provider. This is why Eugene and Jerry have Twitters as well.
Understood. Tweet at Eugene and Jerry if you want to get access to Phoenix.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us today on Validated.
I appreciate it.